Today we're continuing with the basics of geometry and talking about points, lines, and planes. There are three undefined terms in geometry, and these are terms that we use to define others. Geometry is based on these three terms. The first one is a point. A point has no dimension, and it's represented by a small dot named by a letter. So for instance, you can make a dot and give it a letter. I'll say P for point. So that's the symbol that we would use, or how we would represent it, point P. Next is a line extends in one dimension in both opposite directions without end. There are arrows at each end named with two letters. So for example, let's say I have this line, and I'm going to put arrows at each end, and I'm going to use 2 points on the line to show me where my letters are. So I'm going to call these points T and M. And how we label this, how we actually name this line, is we make this little figure, this line with 2 arrows on each end, and underneath it put TM. And we say this line TM. That's how we actually say it. A plane is a flat surface. So this is 2 dimensions, which extends in all vertices without, in all directions without end. Extends in all directions without end, named with 1 interior letter or 3 vertices. Imagine, if you will, a piece of paper that just stretches on and on and on forever. It never, ever ends. So what we're going to do is use 3 vertices to name this. Like, we could use these vertices here. We could call them X, Y, and Z. So we could call it plane XYZ. Or if we had just one interior letter, let's say we had an L here. And by the way, these are your vertices. They're vertices, but yet they're really not, because it goes on and on forever. Or we could say here is one interior letter. L is in the middle of it, so you could just call it plain L. Either one of those is fine. So let's move on. Some other definitions. If something is collinear, this means things that are on the same line. So for instance, if you have this line like so, and you have 3 points on it, say points A, B, and C, those are collinear. If something is coplanar, that means that these 3 things, 3 or more things, or 2 or more things, I should say, are all on the same plane. Like, let's say you have these points, W, X, and Y. Those things are coplanar. So we can say W, X, and Y are coplanar. And in the example above, we would say that points A, B, and C are collinear. Now next, a segment is part of a line with 2 distinct endpoints, named with the 2 endpoints. So for instance, a segment is really just a piece of a line. So it's got a beginning and an end. We call them both endpoints. Even the beginning point we call an endpoint. So like TX. Now we would call that, to actually name it, we would just draw a line with no arrows on it, and then put TX underneath it, and we would call it segment TX. That's how you would actually say that. Next, array is part of a line part of a line with 1 endpoint and extending in the other direction without end. It's named with the endpoint and any other point. So we start with an endpoint, and then we draw a line that goes on and on forever from that point. We name it with the endpoint. Let's say we call the endpoint Q. We have to pick another point on the line, so let's call that R. And here is a symbol that we use. We draw a line with an arrow on one end. The line without the arrow should have the beginning, or what we call the endpoint, underneath it. And we call this ray QR. That's how we actually say it. So let's move on. Here are some examples. Let's draw three non-collinear points, J, K, and L, and then draw segment KL, line JK, and ray LJ. So starting with three non-collinear points. So in other words, we don't want all three of them to be on the same line. I'm just going to put them here randomly. So we have J, K, and L. And we want to draw segment JK. So, I'm sorry, segment KL. So we just are going to connect points K and L. There's your segment. Now we want line JK. So we want this to go on and on forever. So it's going to have to go through both of these. I didn't draw that terribly well, but you get the idea. It's supposed to go through points J and K, but we have to put arrows on it because it goes on and on forever. And then ray LJ. So that means it has to start at L and it has to extend through point J, going on forever. So we start at L, go through J, it goes on forever. So we're going to have to put an arrow on that end. Next, it says sketch a line that intersects a plane at one point. So let's do our best here to just sketch a plane, remembering the plane goes on and on forever. Okay. Excuse me. So imagine a line that goes right down through that plane. So here's your line, goes right through there, and I'm going to imagine that it just kind of picks up. Imagine that going through the center, and then it picks up. I'm going to try to make this a dotted line. Oh, and it didn't work out very well. Let's see if we can get rid of that. Let's see if we can just draw that through. There we go. Just ignore that other little piece that was there. That's supposed to be straight, by the way. But you can imagine this line goes right through that plane, and it goes through at exactly one point right here. There's the point where it goes through. Now, next, we want to sketch two planes that intersect in a line. So here's, let me just change that. There we go. So here is one plane that I'm drawing. And imagine it intersecting with another plane. It goes down like this. It's almost like having a box where sides of the box intersect. Here is your intersection, and it intersects in this line. Remember, these planes go on and on forever. So right here, right there, is your intersection. So imagine the sides of a box coming together. So next, so I guess there is no next. This is actually the end of today's lesson. So a lot of vocabulary, a lot of illustrations, and I will see you in class. Thank you very much for joining me.